Burlak with Motifworks, and delighted to have you all with us for today's webinar, Windows Azure Planning and Implementing Your Hybrid Cloud Deployment. Our presenters today are Shane Koenig, National Partner Technology Strategist with Microsoft, and Nitin Agarwal, CEO of Motifworks. And before we get started, let me go through a few quick webinar items. Please be sure you've downloaded GoToWebinar so you can join in fully. If you have any audio trouble, just check your speakers or headphones. And we also want to make sure we welcome your questions at any time during today's webinar. Just post your questions using the question box on your screen. And be sure to know that we'll also have a dedicated Q&A time after the presentation today. So before I hand it over to Shane and Nitin, I want to mention very quickly we'll post a couple polls for everyone today. And lastly, at the end of the webinar, as hopefully you all know, we'll draw the winner of the Nokia Lumia smartphone giveaway that we have planned for today. So good luck to everyone today on that. And very quickly for our agenda, Shane and Nitin will offer an overview of the Windows Azure Cloud Platform, and they'll discuss the benefits of the hybrid cloud, and then how to plan and implement a hybrid cloud deployment. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shane Koenig, and Shane, pass this over to you, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi everybody, and welcome, and thank you very much for joining our presentation today on hybrid cloud. The first thing that I'd like to discuss with you is kind of the cloud on your terms, and the starting point for that discussion is actually in your local data center. On the left, you'll notice that there's a physical and a virtualization box. Physical is kind of where things all started years ago. Virtualization, of course, has come into its own here in the last few years, and most people actually have a local data center with both physical and virtualization mix, and that is kind of where things are at for most companies in this day and age. Now if you look down at the bottom, there's some red boxes. What that indicates is kind of how much control you have over your environment under that model, and basically where things are at today. So in that model, you have control over everything as far as heating, cooling, capacity planning, maintaining the hardware, the operating system, all the patching, applications, and data. Now recently, some new technologies came into being, and that is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And just so that everybody has a really clear understanding of those items, you can see the differing layers there also of responsibility, and where it's blue is actually where Microsoft actually takes over and is controlling and maintaining, and red is where you still maintain control. Now if we start on the far right with software as a service, you can really think of that as Microsoft's Office 365 holding. In that model, you have control over your data and which users have access to what. But as far as the application, the operating system, and the underlying hardware and infrastructure is all maintained by Microsoft, and it's pretty much hands-off. If we switch over to infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, those are the two main components of Windows Azure today. And Windows Azure, of course, is Microsoft's public cloud offering. Infrastructure as a service is, you can think of it as the virtual machines running everything from SQL Server, SharePoint, many other technologies. But in that mode, you control the application and the operating system. You're tasked with actually maintaining those pieces, but the underlying hardware and infrastructure is all maintained by Microsoft. In the platform as a service model, that really comes into play more heavily with web-based applications, and also with ISVs who do a lot of custom development and website creation. But under the platform model, you do have access still over your application and control to do code changes, and also keep your hands on your data. But the underlying virtual machines and hardware that are running your application are actually still maintained and controlled by Microsoft. Now, I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with the IDC, but that's kind of where things are kind of going today. So we have all these great technologies, but how do you combine them together? and that is really through hybrid cloud. And under the hybrid cloud model, you can think of it as just an extension of your local data center, extending your network in-house up to the cloud to give yourself extra scalability and basically connect to your apps in the cloud. And under that model, you still maintain control over all your applications and users and data. Microsoft handles all the back-end pieces on the public cloud, and the operating system and applications, you would still control that and help maintain that. Kind of having given you that overview, I wanted to cover a little bit about some of the actual workloads and scenarios where hybrid cloud really makes sense. One of those, which is infrastructure as a service for dev and test. Historically, when you're doing dev and test, you end up giving those people the old hardware that you're writing off the books, things that are going on, are basically out of date and lower performing systems. With infrastructure as a service, you can actually spin up virtual machines, replicate those machines, make rev codes, and actually do all your testing, build and bring them back up in a moment's notice, and you're getting very front-end, high-performing hardware. One company that actually utilizes this very heavily is Walt Disney. Their Pixar branch actually works with all of their movie rendering actually on infrastructure as a service, and they've used PowerShell scripts to actually load and take offline about 1,000 systems to actually do their processing. Moving on to application migration to infrastructure as a service, a lot of people have IaaS running in their local data center. Why not expand that up to the cloud? You would still have your VPN connectivity to your public cloud offering, so you could still very easily get to the back end of those applications, keep them updated, but you have the extra reliability of you can actually set up scalability as well. It will add machines to your pool and take them away if your site gets slows down. And like I said, it can add machines to your actual pool as your system takes more, is getting more activity. A third area is SharePoint on Windows Azure. That works kind of the same way. You could actually host your SharePoint front end on Windows Azure, have your back end still in your local data center, so you still have local control of your data, and basically keep that uptime and scalability. And the next area we would move into is cloud integrated storage. What we're seeing here is a lot of people backing up to the cloud, taking their data and moving it off-site, getting rid of the realization that they have to have somebody come and pick up tapes or CDs and take them off-site. If you have a situation where something is down, you have to contact those people to come and actually go pick up the tape and bring it back to the office. With this, you have full control over your data. Over the secure VPN connection, you just connect your Azure subscription, you restore what you need to in your local data center or on your Azure machines, and you don't have to rely on anybody else but yourself. Then we move on to the SQL and business intelligence. There's some new features and functionality inside of Windows Azure, and a lot of people are taking and actually replicating their SQL server to a backup SQL server running on Azure, utilizing the business intelligence to go through that data, look for points that would be important to their business and important to their customers. And finally, I talked a little bit about Office 365, but one area that has really been growing is actually extending Active Directory to the cloud for extra fault tolerance. Along with that is ADFS and password synchronization, which you can design a system for single sign-on for Office 365 or for any other third-party applications. All right, so what do you get with Windows Azure Infrastructure Services? Basically, you get a scalable platform and infrastructure for your apps. If you need to add another server, you can actually add a server and load balance your application across that while still maintaining your connection back to your local data center. You can run SQL Server in the cloud. You can also run your backup SQL Server in the cloud, replicate data across your secure VPN for extra fault tolerance and off-site storage. You can run SharePoint in the cloud. It enables you to deeply customize. A lot of companies actually work with SharePoint and design solutions around SharePoint that doesn't integrate well with hosted SharePoint. So why not run it on a virtual machine? And you can actually connect that back to your local data center and still have secure connectivity to your data. You can actually extend your current network infrastructure and create a hybrid design with a single identity. And finally, you can actually you have the real-time flexible test and dev environment. You can spin it up. You can take that environment offline. You can replicate that environment over and over again very rapidly, and the system scales very nicely. So this is just another view of how it looks graphically, connecting your data center to Windows Azure, which is a public cloud, to create your hybrid cloud design. And so you'd have your virtual machines. Obviously, you'd have a secure virtual network created over a site-to-site VPN back to your local network. The platform is very scalable, and the infrastructure in the cloud, you can literally spin up a machine in less than 6 minutes. There's a growing list of validated and Microsoft-supported workloads. I mean, everything from Linux to Oracle to, of course, all the Microsoft products. It's growing daily. There's new agreements in place all the time and new technologies being implemented. It's a very secure network. There is, SSL-protected VPN connectivity. All traffic on your virtual network cannot be intercepted from other virtual networks within that cloud. And then you can connect your on-prem Active Directory and domains with a domain up in Azure. You can still even add a second domain controller or a third up in the cloud for that extra fault tolerance. All of it can be managed using System Center all the way straight through with one tool. You can manage your on-prem Hyper-V installations. You can manage your Azure installations. You can move machines from your local Hyper-V deployment and run them in Azure directly, and you can actually pull those machines back from Azure and run them in your local data center again. It's all one straight through solution. And it integrates really well with Azure applications. If you do any development, it's real easy to actually spin up an application, run it on Windows Azure. There's just an actual little walkthrough you have to go through, and as long as the application is created on Microsoft-based technologies, there is no changes that even have to be made to the application. Well, with that, I will hand it over to Nitin, who will talk to you about planning and implementing your hybrid cloud.
Okay, thank you, Shane, and thanks for a great overview about Windows Azure hybrid cloud offering. For my part of today's presentation, I will cover how to plan and implement a hybrid cloud deployment. But before we do that, let's do a quick poll. Ken?
Okay. Thank you, Nitin. And first poll for everybody is, what are your top concerns moving to the cloud, hybrid cloud? We'll just take a few seconds, maybe 20 seconds or so, let everybody have a chance to go ahead and answer those questions. Again, what are your top concerns moving to the cloud, hybrid cloud? And a few more seconds. Okay, about 5 more seconds, and we'll get to look at some results, and then we'll head back into the rest of the presentation. Okay, and allow me to 3, 2, 1 close the poll and take a look at what results. It looks like some interesting results. 50% no concerns already using the cloud. As you all can see, 33% data security and compliance. So again, thank you all. I'm going to now get back into the presentation with Nitin.
Okay, so let's start by looking at why hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud is about choice. It gives you options to deploy the workload to the infrastructure that is best suited based on its need, based on its security and compliance need, based on its performance and scalability needs. And it is the choice provided by hybrid cloud that addresses some of the major concerns we just looked at in the previous poll, moving to the public cloud. And let's look at how. You're going to see some concerns, but they're not in a specific order. So one of the concerns we generally hear is loss of control. People think that when they move to the public cloud, they lose the control of their infrastructure, which is to a certain extent is true. But hybrid cloud gives you the full control to decide what and when an application should move to the cloud or move to the public cloud. The next concern we generally hear is security, and this should not be new to anyone. It's generally the top concern. And hybrid cloud, again, gives you the control to decide what's the best location for your applications and data based on their security requirement, privacy, and compliance requirement. Additionally, it gives you a different level of security, which is very important. Another concern we generally see is increased complexity, added overhead, and now your staff may not have the expertise, and public cloud would add additional overhead to the existing processes. But with a cloud platform like Windows Azure, and Shane just talked about the System Center 2012. So using tools like System Center, you can now manage all your infrastructure, whether it's on-premise or on the public cloud, seamlessly, and it gives you a single point of control. And there are some other tools available in the market, not just System Center, that gives you that seamless view across multiple clouds. Next is vendor lock-in, and this is one of the very good point around the hybrid cloud, where hybrid cloud provides you the portability, where you can use the virtual machine images and you decide when they should move to the cloud, and if needed, you can bring them back to on-premise. So that's portability. It helps you minimize that concern of vendor lock-in. My objective today is not to sell you on the hybrid cloud, but to leave you with information and good information to give this a closer look. Moving on, next I want to talk about how to plan for hybrid cloud. In a recent report by Gartner, it predicts that nearly half of the enterprises will be using hybrid cloud by end of 2017. And I think it makes sense because hybrid cloud provides best of both private and public worlds. It gives you the economies and efficiency of a public cloud with the security and control of your private cloud. But the technology is still emerging, and it requires advanced thinking and planning. And here is a suggested approach for planning your move to the cloud. It starts with a vision and a strategy. So we have seen in some of our customers where a move to the cloud is triggered and started by an individual project or by a new initiative by an IT team or marketing team. That's okay, but I strongly believe for a true enterprise deployment, it should start from the top. You should have a clear vision and define what are the underlying drivers and communicate with your team. Next is the workload assessments. You should do a server and application inventory. You should look at your past and projected growth of a number of applications and the data. Are you planning to develop new applications down the line? Are you retiring existing applications? And all this information will form the basis of a cloud strategy. Review your compliance and security requirement, and this is a big one. And I strongly recommend you to involve your security advisors and auditors early in the process. And not to put brakes on what you're doing, but to make them part of the process as well. And I feel data security should not be an issue if handled properly. It should not be an issue in cloud if handled properly. What we should do is we should understand the risk, classify the sensitivity of the data, and then classify these data assets into different categories. And based on this classification, it will help you to identify which data sets or databases should move to the cloud and which one should remain on-premise. Next step is vendor selection and management. Before moving on to the data and applications to a cloud, it is important to ensure the cloud provider has strong security and privacy policies in place. You need to know their SLAs, understand their technology stack, understand that if it is a good fit. Just because it's one of the popular platforms and someone else is using it, you just need to make sure that it's a good fit. And that's where platform again like Microsoft Azure, they provide a good fit where you might already be using the softwares like SharePoint, Windows Server, and SQL Server, Active Directory, and it becomes a natural extension to the Windows Azure public cloud. Architecture and deployment, which is the next thing. When you are planning for it, you need to think about the network architecture well in advance. How all these components and applications are going to fit together. How are they going to communicate with each other? And you need to have a longer-term vision for this architecture. Next in my list is governance and standards. These are your operating procedures, and this is very, very important. We all understand the need for this. We all know how important these are, but we often overlook this. And just due to the fact of moving an urge to move quickly. But this is very important, and to make sure that you have an enterprise deployment, a successful migration, this has to be taken care as part of your planning process. Your workload migration criteria. Now, I read somewhere that cloud is for everyone, but it's not for everything, and I totally believe in this. Use cloud and hybrid cloud where it makes sense. It's not for everything. You can't just define a workload migration criteria based on its scalability requirements and based on your elasticity things that you're looking for, and even security requirements. Provisioning workflow. This is somewhat covered in governance, and you can, but I like to highlight that as a separate thing because you need to understand that how are you going to classify, group, and manage virtual machines and infrastructure? How are you going to roll out between different departments? Does each one of your departments have a separate subscription, or they are using just one subscription of your organization? Because as you start moving more and more application infrastructure to the cloud, it starts to become big, and you need to understand the billing and all the different things. So definitely define the provisioning workflow well in advance. The next is continuity planning, which is, we all know, as Shane has talked about, that Windows Azure Cloud can be used for business disaster recovery and continuity planning. But at the same time, even the application that you are moving to the cloud, you need to make sure that you have a continuity planning to make it a successful migration. So moving on, let's take a deeper dive into implementing your hybrid cloud. How are you going to do that? Based on the experiences working with multiple customers, the implementation approach here will help you to fast track your migration and implementation of hybrid cloud. And to make this approach more comprehensive, this is divided into 4 steps, starting with discovery, planning, implementation, and finally management and monitoring. So I'm going to cover the top 3 in more detail. And manage and monitoring, it actually requires a separate topic of webinar in itself. In fact, all of them do, but we're going to talk more about discovery, planning, and implementation in the next few minutes. So discovery, it starts with your network diagrams. Your network environment is the key to enable connectivity between the on-premise environment and the public cloud. And the list here, it defines the areas that you need to explore and obtain information within your environment or your customer's environment if you are a consultant. At the completion of the step, you will have a lot of information gathered around network diagrams, list of assets, virtual machines, different applications, and so on that will be used for planning and implementation. A network diagram includes routers, firewall, IP address ranges, information about your DMZ, network perimeter, You also need to look at what are the different servers you have. Are they physical or virtual? Where are these servers located? Are they distributed in multiple data centers? And if you are multiple data center company, it will add to complexity of the process to manage that multiple data center connectivity. Identify the workload and applications that are going to be migrated to the cloud. Get a list of targeted applications, the operating system and CPU requirements, and so on. Backup and disaster recovery process. Understand how the workloads are backups currently. How are they performed? How are they configured? What is the data retention policy? What is the security policy around the backups? And finally, the identity solution. All this comes under your discovery, where in the identity solution is basically around if you are using Active Directory or some other identity provider. When you move to the hybrid cloud, how does your hybrid, your application on the public cloud is going to interact with the identity provider? Once you have all this information, you can now move on to the planning stage. And before I talk about planning, I'll tell you one more thing. There are tools provided by Microsoft and even some other outside vendor, tools like Microsoft VRF Accelerator, even Cloud Velocity is another company that provides you an automated discovery tools. So there are some tools that can help you with the discovery process. But I would definitely suggest don't just rely on that. You need to apply your knowledge of the system and infrastructure. Moving on to the planning. Planning, it should start with education. You know, cloud platforms are always evolving. It's still, in my mind, and especially the hybrid, it's a newer technology. And it is critical to spend time to learn about the platform. You can always get expert help, but having your staff comfortable with the targeted platform, that's very, very important. Once you do that, you need to plan your identity management. Plan for how you are going to manage these identities that we have collected that information during the discovery phase. Define whether that Active Directory server is going to remain in on-premise or it's going to go to Azure. If the Azure Active Directory is going to be joining the domain server of on-premise Active Directory. Define the IT and security requirements and resiliency and software level agreements. There is a great paper from Microsoft about enabling resilient cloud architectures. I strongly recommend you reading it. It's called as Fail-Safe Guidance for Resilient Cloud Architectures. If you search on MSDN website, you should see that. Next, you need to define your network topology. So you know, based on the applications and network diagrams that you collected, that, and then now you need to define the architecture of how the network is going to look like when you move to the cloud environment. And in that, it will include your cloud service namespace. If you are using Windows Azure, it will include your Windows Azure subnets, the gateway subnet, the DNS server that you will be using, even VPN gateway address and VPN connectivity. So all that needs to be defined and properly planned in your network topology. And finally, the virtual machine templates, where you will define that for each application, what part of the application is remain on premise and what is moving to the public cloud, how they are going to be connected, what is the role of each of these virtual machines. Are they application servers? Are they database servers? Are they batch processing servers? And even as we've seen in many cases, they could be just a development and test environment. So you need to define the virtual machine templates and understand what are the requirements for these. What are the products that needs to be required or installed during the sysprep image. You need to understand the endpoints. Basically, these are the ports that need to be opened on the virtual machine. For example, RDP port is open by default, but whether it's 80, 443, and some other ports that you need to open. Implementation, that's the final thing. And that final approach that I've listed, the steps, are more specific around Windows Azure. I think the discovery and planning stage, they tend to remain same across different platforms. But the implementation that I have listed here is more around Windows Azure. The steps may remain more and same in other platforms, but they may not be exactly same. So the implementation starts with deploying a network. So you create an affinity group, and you basically create a virtual network, deploy the VPN, you deploy your first server, and configure your Active Directory, virtual machine images, and finally you deploy and test. The last step is management and monitoring, which is a topic for a separate webinar in itself, as I said. But at the basic level, I can tell you, you can do the monitoring using you can use the monitoring using the management portal. You can use Windows PowerShell commands. You can also use System Center Orchestrator, and there are other tools available that like RightScale, BlueStripe, which will allow you to manage and monitor the hybrid cloud environments. Now, before we move to the next slide, it's time for another poll questions. So I appreciate you're going to reply on this.
Okay, thank you, Nitin, and sorry about my early hit on the button. So poll number 2, what stage are you in with cloud migration in your organization or your company? Take a few seconds to take a look at this. Again, what stage are you in with cloud migration in your organization or company? We'll take about 10 more seconds. And 5 more seconds or so. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close, and let's take a look at results and some interesting numbers. 40% considering the next 6 months, and 40% using it now for production apps. And thank you all for taking the poll, and I'll hand it back to Nitin.
Okay, so this is going to be my last slide, which is what I want to cover in this webinar, and want to end the webinar with this, where what are the critical factors? As you are planning and implementing your hybrid cloud, what are the critical factors for a successful migration? What are some of the key requirements and factors that you should be aware of? The application should run seamlessly. Now this should seem like a no-brainer and a straightforward thing. But at the same time, I feel that sometimes we get driven by the technology. If something is not working, we blame the cloud or the connectivity or something like that. But from a business perspective, it should not matter. Where the applications are running, it should not matter to the business users. And so make sure that you consider that as the number 1 point to cover. Your critical data center services. It's like these are the services, whether you are connecting to a database, you are processing files, you're using authentication, firewall settings, they all should run regardless of the location. Intuitive configuration and management. Now this is where your IT team is going to manage these environments. So they have to have a good and easy to use graphical interface. If they are comfortable with DOS, something like PowerShell could also be useful. But it has to be very intuitive configuration for them to manage these environments. Governance. Again, I cannot stress more on this. This is definitely very, very important. One of the benefits of cloud we see is we give the developers the resources that they need in a matter of hours and minutes, but not in weeks and months. That's the benefit of public cloud, to give you accelerate your time to market. But you can't just leave it to them to provision new resources. You don't want to tie their hands, but at the same time, you want to define responsibility and accountability. So make sure that you have these policies defined. You set the limits and quotas, check the usage of the VMs. You create central repository, logs, monitoring. Secure data in motion and data at rest. Again, we all want security, and that's one of the top priority for everyone. So when you connect your on-premise data center with cloud, make sure that the data is encrypted between the two channels, and the data is encrypted when it is residing on the cloud. Layered security. Now Windows Azure provides you this in a different forms, like virtual networks, affinity groups, subnets, and adding more different security policies and configuring your endpoints. But any cloud provider that you use, make sure that it provides you different layer of securities. Easy synchronization on updates. End of the day, you are using cloud to gain efficiency and more effective in your application development. And adding a hybrid cloud should not make it difficult to synchronize and update our applications. That should be easy. Automatic discovery and dependency detection. We all are human, and we tend to forget things, the dependencies on an application and used by an application, especially when the application has been running in production for the last 3, 4, 5 years. So try to use automatic tools, and especially as they become more mature, that has to be part of your process and your planning and vision to do these things in a more automated fashion. And finally, portability. This allows you to be prepared and mitigate your risk and for any vendor lock-in. And this makes sure that your technology or the provider that you choose, it provides you the portability for your virtual machines. With this, I come to an end of my presentation, and before we look at the question and answers Q&A, I want to take a quick moment and tell you a bit more about Motifworks. Motifworks is a cloud and mobile solutions company that helps migrate your application infrastructure to the cloud. We specialize in Windows Azure, and we are proud to be an Azure Circle partner, which only a selected companies in the US have that. We work with software product companies as well as enterprise companies in a variety of industries, including financial services, retail, and education technology. Core of what we do is we design and build cloud and mobile solutions. We help you accelerate your time to market and drive business growth. How we do it? We bring startup-like energy to the process with a process-driven approach. And using our expertise in cloud and mobile, we enable companies to build better solutions faster. With this, I'm ready to take any questions. And Shane, we have a few questions that I'm actually going to pass it on to you as well. But please feel free to ask any questions. You should see a question box in your GoToWebinar. So first question I can see here is, and Shane, this might be for you, how efficient is Azure backup? Do you want to take that?
Sure. Thank you, Nitin. The Windows Azure backup is actually very good at doing compression, and you can actually back up machines in your local data center or that are running on Azure using Data Protection Manager, Windows Server, or Windows Server 2012 Essentials. And basically, the way that it works is very similar to other backup technologies, but it's just that your data then would be pushed up to the cloud once the backup actually happens. And like I stated, it is compressed at a very high ratio, so it really cuts down on the actual storage you're going to need, and is a very cheap solution.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Hopefully that answers the question. Another question I have, and I'm going to take it, and Shane, please chime in. How about the performance and latency in the hybrid environment? So that's a really good question, and I would say latency, it's one of the greatest challenges of hybrid cloud is network latency. So you need to understand the latency requirements between different components and application inside a workload, and you need to look at and test when you deploy that VPN connectivity, test that network latency. And I'm sure that in cases that where we have migrated SharePoint, the network latency is published, and it hasn't been an issue in the environments that we have seen. Shane, do you have anything to add?
No, you're hitting right on the mark there. I guess, yeah, I mean the latency, if you're using a remote desktop or you're using any kind of web-based applications, it works just the same way as it always would. And of course, if you're pulling down large files or something, you are going to see a little delay of some kind, but it shouldn't be anything out of the ordinary.
Okay. there's one more question here, I think it's specific around Windows Azure. Shane, I can, why don't you try this? The question is, do we get charged for not running virtual machines? Or do we need to delete the virtual machines to not get charged?
Well, as the actual thing says, you pay for what you use. Now, there is a consideration, though, that when you're in the portal and you want to actually shut the machine down so that you don't get charged, you do not actually have to delete the machine, but you can also not log into the console of the server and shut it down that way. You have to actually go into your Azure portal, and there is a button in your dashboard that you just hit that actually takes it offline and deallocates the resources that it's using. And then to bring it back online, all you actually have to do is go in and start it back up. It will reallocate the resources and bring it back online. But while it is offline and deallocated, it will not, you will not be charged.
And Shane, we don't get charged even for any storage space? So if the machine has, let's say, 100 gig, if I've configured the machine for a 100 GB hard drive?
You do get charged for your storage, but you will not get charged for the compute hours. So if you do have a lot of data or something sitting out on a drive, you will still be getting billed for that, but it's at a set monthly rate, based on how much you're consuming. So, for example, if you have a 1 terabyte drive sitting out there, you will get charged $11 for that storage, but you will not get charged any of the compute hours for that actual virtual machine.
Okay. So just one last question I have, and I think I can definitely take that. So can you provide some training resources? And I'm assuming this is basically training resources around plan for migration. So if the resources is around, we do have some checklists that we use, some kind of process documents, specifically around Windows Azure, and I'm sure Microsoft has some of the best practices around that. So yeah, if you need any of that information, please feel free to contact us, and we are happy to share that with you. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you taking time, and I will hand it over to Ken for the closing.
Well, thank you, Shane, with Microsoft, and Nitin, certainly, with Motifworks for today's presentations. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. We appreciate the questions and the opportunity to interact with each of you. Please know very quickly before you go that we'll make this recording of this webinar available promptly, and gladly connect with anyone of you who would like to continue this conversation offline. You can see the contact information on your screen. We also welcome your feedback for today's webinar so that we can improve our effort for next time. Please check your inbox in just a little bit for a brief survey that will be emailed to you in a few moments. And as well as stated earlier, we'll email the winner of the Nokia Lumia smartphone from today's drawing. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you again.